This is not breaking news. This is not a scandal. This is not about one person. This is about a quiet switch inside the global system. A switch that turns friendships into punishments, turns trade into a weapon, turns a coastline into a message, and turns ordinary jobs into collateral. You can watch it happen without hearing a single siren. No tanks in the streets. No official declaration. Just a series of normal moves that look unrelated until they lock together. And once they lock together, you don't get to opt out because the price is paid in jobs, in stability, in what your country can say out loud without being billed for it later. So if you want to understand what's coming next, stay with me. Because the first sign is never the announcement. It's the alignment. And we're already past that point. What controls this system now is not ideology, not alliance, not even military power on its own. What controls it is access. Access to markets, access to finance, access to legitimacy. And access is no longer neutral. It is conditional. You are allowed to trade until you aren't. You are allowed to host summits until someone decides not to show up. You are allowed to speak in legal language until that language triggers consequences somewhere else. This is how the system enforces obedience without orders. No commands, no ultimatums, just pressure applied through multiple doors at once. Security signals here, economic penalties there, narratives that soften the ground before the impact. And the most dangerous part is that none of these actions looks extreme on its own. Each one is defensible. Each one is explainable. Each one is reversible on paper. But together, they create a trap. Because once the system is framed this way, every decision becomes a test. And the tests are already being graded. There was a time when alignment was loud. Public treaties, formal blocks, clear lines. That's not how it works anymore. Now the shift happens quietly, incrementally, so slowly that each step feels survivable. Before, power reacted to actions. Now it reacts to posture, to proximity, to who you appear next to, even if nothing is signed. Before, consequences followed decisions. Now, consequences anticipate them. A meeting becomes a signal. A port visit becomes a headline. A delay becomes a statement. And the system rewards those who move carefully, but punishes those who pause too long. What changed is not the pressure. It's the speed and the silence. Because when change is gradual, resistance feels unnecessary. When consequences are delayed, warnings feel abstract. When nothing collapses immediately, denial feels rational. That's how normalization works. Not through shock, through repetition. And once something is normalized, reversing it feels like escalation, which means the most dangerous moment is not when the system snaps. It's when everyone agrees that this is just how things are now. Then the system delivers a shock, not the kind that explodes, the kind that lands, ships arrive, not as a threat, as a visit, scheduled, permitted, photographed. Official language stays calm, routine, cooperative, focused on safety, focused on stability, but the location matters, the timing matters, and who is watching matters most. Because nothing here violates a rule, nothing breaks a treaty, nothing crosses a red line that exists on paper. And yet the message travels instantly, through markets, through embassies, through analysts who understand what this really is. This is not about what happens at sea. It's about what happens next. Because once the signal is sent, it doesn't need to be repeated. It only needs to be interpreted. And interpretation is where pressure begins. Quietly, indirectly, through channels that never appear in the same headline. What looks like cooperation in one frame becomes justification in another. And here's the part that should make you uneasy. The response doesn't arrive immediately. No announcement, no retaliation, just waiting, because the system never strikes at the moment of visibility. It strikes later, somewhere else. Here is how the mechanism actually works. Pressure is never applied where the signal is sent. It's applied where resistance is weakest, not at the port, not at the podium, but at the paycheck, at the factory gate, at the export contract that quietly expires. This system doesn't argue. It recalculates. Access becomes leverage. Leverage becomes policy. And policy is enforced without ever being announced. One sector absorbs the shock. Then another, each loss small enough to explain, large enough to be felt. The people who benefit are insulated. They have options. They have buffers. They have time. The people who absorb the damage don't. They live inside the lag between cause and consequence, between decision and denial. And because the mechanism is dispersed, no single actor appears responsible. No villain. No single moment you can point to and say, that's when it happened, which is the point. This system survives by staying invisible, by letting every part claim neutrality, by letting every impact look accidental. And once the damage is measurable, the alignment has already hardened, because by then, reversal doesn't look like correction. It looks like surrender. Then the pressure accelerates faster, sharper, less patient. Decisions that used to take months now arrive without warning. A meeting is canceled. A visit doesn't happen. A promise is reconsidered. The language stays polite, professional, technically correct. But the math changes overnight. Numbers move. Forecasts shift. Jobs become variables. Not because something failed internally, but because something external reclassified you. And reclassification is the most dangerous act in this system. Because once it happens, every future decision is filtered through it. You are no longer a partner. You are a risk. Aid becomes conditional. Trade becomes selective. Visibility becomes liability. Nothing is announced. Nothing is explained. You're simply treated differently. And here's the escalation. Domestic pressure begins to rise. Workers feel it first, then unions, then industries that were never part of the original decision. They ask questions. They want answers. But the answers are scattered across ministries, across borders, across rationales that never fully connect, which means the crisis doesn't explode. It spreads. And spread is harder to stop than shock. This is where it reaches you, not as policy, not as strategy, as interruption. The shift shows up in conversations you weren't part of, in decisions made far away, in outcomes explained as market conditions. You feel it as delay, as uncertainty, as the quiet sense that something stable is no longer guaranteed. Plans get postponed, hiring freezes, contracts shrink. And nobody tells you this is political. They tell you it's economic, temporary, unrelated. But you can feel the pattern, even if you can't name it yet, because when access tightens, it doesn't tighten evenly. It tightens downward. Those with leverage adjust. Those without absorb. And here's the part that matters. You didn't vote on this. You didn't negotiate it. You didn't stand on a dock or sit in a summit room. Yet you're paying for alignment decisions made in your name. So if you're wondering why the pressure feels personal, why it feels sudden, why it feels unfair, it's because the system is working exactly as designed. And it's not done yet. Now it stops being local. What began as a signal in one place starts showing up somewhere else. Supply chains adjust. Insurance prices change. Shipping routes get reevaluated. Not because anything broke, but because uncertainty traveled faster than goods. Investors don't wait for clarity. They price risk ahead of it. And once risk is priced in, it becomes self-reinforcing. A decision here reshapes behavior there. A headline there alters confidence everywhere. Other countries notice. Not the details. The pattern, they watch what happens when alignment is questioned. They watch how pressure is applied without speeches. They watch how quickly economic pain follows symbolic defiance, and they learn some pull back quietly, some hedge, some accelerate moves they were already considering. This is how blocks expand without formal invitations. This is how deterrence works without threats. Because the message doesn't say, don't do this. It says, watch what happens when someone else does. And once that lesson spreads, the system doesn't need to intervene as often. It starts regulating itself, which is when control becomes hardest to see. From here, the system has three paths. The first is adjustment, small recalibrations, careful language, symbolic balance, enough compliance to restore access without admitting retreat. It works temporarily until the next signal is sent and the test resets. The second path is erosion, slow disengagement, less access, more friction, fewer options each year. Nothing collapses, but nothing fully recovers either. Capacity drains quietly. Talent leaves, growth becomes harder to explain, and then there is rupture, not immediate, not dramatic, but decisive, a moment when pressure outweighs patience. When a line is crossed, not legally, but politically, and responses stop being measured. Rupture doesn't mean war. It means separation. Economic, institutional, psychological, and the danger is not choosing the wrong path. The danger is drifting into one without realizing the choice was already made. Because in this system, inaction is not neutrality. Delay is not protection. Silence is interpreted, and interpretation becomes destiny, which means the future is not being planned, it's being accelerated. Whether anyone is ready or not, this doesn't end with relief. It doesn't end with balance, and it doesn't end with reassurance. Because systems like this don't resolve, they recalibrate. They wait, they apply pressure where memory is shortest. What you're watching is not a dispute. It's a template, a way to discipline choices without orders, a way to punish alignment without confrontation, a way to make sovereignty expensive. And once a template works, it gets reused. Not everywhere, not all at once, but selectively, precisely where resistance costs the least. So the real question isn't who is right, or who provoked whom, or which side sounds stronger today. The real question is whether this becomes normal, whether economic pain replaces persuasion, whether access replaces diplomacy, whether silence becomes the safest strategy. Because if this is the future, then what's happening now isn't an exception. It's rehearsal. If you want to understand what happens when the next country reaches this point, or how far this system can go before it breaks, you'll want to stay here. Because the warning isn't over. It's just moved closer.